I'll start off. Hi, welcome everyone to today's webinar, A Challenging Combination, Holidays and Grief. My name is Laura Landers and I'll be your webinar moderator for today. And before we get started, I just wanted to let you know a little bit about the ARBEST program and do some housekeeping. Arkansas Building Effective Services for Trauma, or ARBEST, is a state-funded program at the UAMS Psychiatric Research Institute, and our aim is to improve mental health services for children and families who experience trauma. We work closely with multiple partners to bring a more trauma-informed state, and we're probably best known for providing training to mental health professionals on treatments that are effective with helping children and families recover from trauma. So just a couple of housekeeping announcements before we get started. If you have any questions throughout the webinar or comments, please feel free to type them in the chat and we'll try to answer them as we go along. If you're interested in earning a CEU, stick around to the very end and I'll give you a little more instruction on how to do that. We are recording this webinar and we will upload it to our ARBEST YouTube channel. We have other previously recorded webinars there, so you can check those out. And don't forget to like our Facebook page. We frequently post upcoming webinars, training opportunities, and other resources there. So today I have a wonderful presenter I'm really excited for you guys to get to know, Greg Adams. Greg Adams is a program coordinator for the Center for Good Mourning and Staff Bereavement Support at Arkansas Children's Hospital. Greg has worked at ACH in a variety of roles and areas, including pediatric oncology and palliative care since 1991. He is an adjunct professor with the University of Arkansas Little Rock and has been an active volunteer with community and professional organizations. He is also author of Adam Gets Back in the Game, a child's storybook about coping with grief and loss. He's married with 2 adult children. So welcome, Greg Adams.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's a pleasure to be here. All right. I think that means I'm supposed to share some slides and get started. So let me do that. So thank you everybody for tuning in today and taking some time during this busy time of year. All right, it said that I couldn't share. I had to request it, and now I can share. Right. Are we seeing what? Not didn't see anything yet? It's still dark.
It showed up and then it disappeared.
Well, that is a mystery to me. I don't know what that is about. All right, let me try that again. I've never had that happen before. Hmm. All right. Well, while we double check and see what's going on there, because that did go blank. Um, I'll go back and see if we can get that going. But I do appreciate everybody being here today. And it's a common concern that people have if you're supporting grieving people or if you're a grieving person yourself, is about the challenges of coping during the holidays. And it's very understandable why that would be a challenge because the holidays are stressful in general when nothing special has happened, even though we think about them as being really helpful and can be such meaningful, warm, and joyous times, but there's something else that goes on too. And they can also be challenging times. And we're going to try this one more time and cross our fingers. And then let's try this. Oh, now we're in business. Okay, Laura, are we good?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, thank you. And I will tell you all that the slides that I'm sharing today we'll share those for you late with Laura after the end of the today, and then they'll be glad to be shared with other folks. Since this is a time where many of us are having our own losses and dealing with our own sometimes regrets or heavy things in our lives. Just a word in the beginning, just to whatever it means to take care of yourself as we're listening to this. If you think it was a good idea to come, and then you got to get into it and you think it's not so good of an idea and you want to back out or whatever that means, please do take care of yourself. And also, I want to share with you some ideas that have made sense to me and that I've learned from other people, grieving people, and other people who support grieving people. But no one is the expert of somebody else's life. We know that. And so if any of these things that I'm sharing, if they don't make sense to you or in the work that you do, then just let them go and don't worry about it. Because again, nobody is an expert of your experience or the work that you do more than you are. But if you're not so sure, um, and you think maybe it's helpful, but you're not sure, then I'd encourage you to let it stick around and put it on the back burner and let it stew for a while in case it might be useful to you. And if it's helpful, then all the better. So I thought it would be good for us to do a little review of some things that we know about grief and loss within a holiday lens to it. And so that we could be thinking about what do we know about grief, and then how does that fit in the context of a special time of year, this is for most people. Um, so we think about what most people experience with grief, and grief, I would want to say in the beginning, is whenever we've had a loss, and a loss doesn't have to be a death, although we're going to think about it mostly as death losses today. But it doesn't have to be a death. It could be a loss of a relationship. For instance, the holidays are certainly challenging times for parents who have experienced a divorce, and also for other members of their family, their kids and their parents. But it could also be a loss of place, or it could be a loss of health. But we're going to think about it mostly through the lens of the loss of life today. And so, in that regard, that grief is just a human experience that people have whenever they have a loss, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's a lot right with it. It means that we're connected, and it's not a problem to be solved, as some writers have said. It's something to be supported and experienced. And what we see mostly is that grief goes up and down. After we've had a big loss, it goes up and down, and sometimes they're harder and sometimes they're better. And over time, it kind of levels out. And for us, and the lows don't go as low, and they don't last as long. But we know too that it's not a linear thing. It's not a straight line from low to high. It does go up and down, and sometimes it actually gets worse before it gets better. And because we start feeling things that we didn't feel in the beginning because we were numb or in shock, or we just couldn't go through them. And so part of what it's like for it to go through that first year of grief is experiencing that, wow, this still happens. This happens now. And Thanksgiving is different. And the start of December is different. And the holiday times and when we family gathered is different. And you're still gone. And but we don't know it in the same way until we experience it. And it's really typical, that there are times of the year where it's harder. And those could be birthdays, those could be anniversaries of weddings, it could be anniversaries of when a diagnosis happened, or when the last time we got to do something special before the health went bad, or the last time somebody went into the hospital. And there are other special times a year that sometimes we don't even think about as much. Like it could be, depending on the situation, it could be um, the summertime, or it could be when school starts back, where we really miss somebody, or when um, that person's birthday, or our own birthday, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Halloween, deer season, all those kind of times where, particularly depending on the person, we can really miss somebody. And but what we normally see is that over time, things level out to a place that it's okay, and we go back in some ways to our baseline of how we lived before, although the living is different. And unlike what many of us were taught, if we were taught anything about grief and loss, we're not going to talk about those 5 stages of grief because those don't really hold up. And but this seems to hold up for more people. These are some work that was done by some folks in the Netherlands, and they suggest that there are 2 things that we do. Nobody tells us to do this, we just do them whenever we've had a big loss. One is we this loss orientation where we think about the pain and we deal with all the stress that comes with the loss. But it's not all that we do. Is we also deal with what they call the restoration orientation, which is living. We figure out, okay, how we're going to live now in this new and different reality. And we go back and forth between these two. And one way to think about it is, how are we doing with our balance with this? And this really applies, I think, as we go through to think about how we do it during holiday times. So, how are we doing with the grief part and giving attention, the necessary support and attention to the grief part during a holiday time of year? And how are we doing with the living part and the things that we used to do or want to do or might want to consider doing in the living part? And how do those interact? And in the beginning, the loss orientation and the restoration orientation, we can really get kind of dragged or pulled back and forth without our choice. But over time, we get a chance to purposely go back and forth, and that can be helpful. The other thing I'd want to say is that when grieving people experience the stress that comes with the loss, is that I think it helps for them and us to find ways to feel two different kinds of permission. One is to feel just as bad as we feel, and our culture often doesn't give us a lot of space for that. They tell us to think on the look on the bright side, and that somebody's not suffering anymore, and that they wouldn't want us to feel bad, and they're in a better place, perhaps. And all those things could be true, or we could believe them to be true, but it doesn't mean we don't feel bad. And it doesn't help much to ignore that. And if there's a time where there's an expectation that we're supposed to feel good, it certainly seems to fit the holiday time. But I would suggest that it helps us to find permission in ourselves and from the people around us to feel just as bad as we feel. And then also to be able to have permission to feel it inside of ourselves and from other people to feel better. That it's okay to have a good time. It's okay to feel like life is getting better and in a good place. And it doesn't mean that we are being forgetting or feeling guilt, or that we have to be guilty or be disloyal to the people that we're remembering. Although it can feel like that when we're in this transition period, when we're starting to feel better, and then we think, "Ooh, how can I feel better when I've lost somebody who's so important to me?" Another idea that will come in to this is this idea of continuing bonds, because there used to be the idea that, then we still see this sometimes in media and culture, that our job is to let go of people we have lost. But that really doesn't fit our reality of it. We've learned this through work that Klaus, Silverman, and Nickman have done with bereaved parents, that bereaved parents don't forget their kids. Bereaved children don't forget their parents. And, we can live a good life while remembering. And we don't have to let people go. What we have to do instead is figure out how to be connected to somebody and have a different relationship with someone. And the good news is we have practice at this. And Thomas Haddock said we learn to love people in their absence. And anybody who's a parent has done this with their kids. As their kids get older and become more independent, then our relationship with them changes. And all of us as children have had to learn that with our parents. Our relationship with our parents change. And so we have to let go of that old relationship we had and have to live with the relationship that we actually do have now. And so we do have some practice at this, which is good news. So whenever we have any kind of stress or grief, there are some choices that we get and that about how to respond. And these choices aren't either or. It's not like we choose just one. We can do a combination of them all. And so we would want to push back against that idea that it has to be one or the other, or it's an either or. It can be a both and or an all of the above. And they can be useful, and they can also be not so helpful. But sometimes what we do is we fight it. And when we have negative thoughts or hard thoughts about how much I miss somebody or how wrong this is or how we wish something otherwise, we try to think of other thoughts to replace that and push back against and think about, oh, I'm so grateful I had them, and and things are better than they used to be. And so we are in conflict in some ways, and we're pushing back against the grief and the stress that we feel. Or sometimes what we do is we don't push back as much as we try to avoid it. So let's just try to stay busy. Let's just try to do other things and put our minds other places. Again, that can be helpful, but also can sometimes not so helpful if we're avoiding something that really deserves attention. Sometimes we freeze up and we're not sure what to do. And then one thing that we can do that we don't talk about as much is that we could actually, when the grief comes and the stresses come, we could allow them to come. We could not try to run away from them or try to fight and push back against them. We could let them be and maybe even see what they have to tell us. What if they have anything that might be useful to us, if their reminders might be helpful in some ways. Or we could even come to the place where we wouldn't just allow them to be there. We might even invite them in. And we do this sometimes. And we do this. This will happen with families all across uh, our country and beyond whenever we gather together, because some folks will purposely tell stories. And they'll say, oh, remember when? Or mom used to always, or dad like this, or I sure do miss my brother. And and we will tell a story. And so we're not fighting it and we're not running away from it, but we're letting it in, and we might even be inviting it in because there is that bittersweetness where we reminds us of how we already feel that we miss somebody, but there's something else there too that we yearn for or that we find benefit in. So I'm gonna, before going further, I want to stop and invite your input. So when you think about the holiday season and grieving people, what do you see as the challenges? Something intrigued you enough to come and spend an hour thinking and talking about this and listening to it today. So what do you think of that makes this time a challenging time for grieving people? So let's pause for a second and we're going to pay attention to the chat. Thank you. I see some chat things coming in. Beautiful, beautiful. I'm gonna see if I can take a look at some of that to see. Yeah, yeah. So we do have traditions. Laura and I were talking about that beforehand. Traditions um, can cut so many different ways. It can be helpful, and they can sometimes be limiting, but they're meaningful for us. And uh, and then when we see other people, it reminds us of who we've lost. Thank you for that. It is. Thank you, Dawn. It's good to see your name. It's supposed to be we think of it as a happy season, a joyous season. We sing and talk a lot about joy and happiness and good things. And so the contrast can be really great. I think uh, yeah. So I really appreciate the comment there about it, how it magnifies the loss. So whatever we're feeling beforehand, how much we miss the person, how hard it is to go on with life, I think it can take it up several different degrees of intensity. Um, when we're in that place and seeing other people, what does business do they have to be happy when we are not, and when it's so hard for us? And then there's that part that maybe they're actually not so happy, but they're putting on that face about it and trying to look that way. Yeah. Thank you. You all are bringing in so many things. I like the idea of regrets. Thank you for that. And um, and that the first years are especially hard for many people when they haven't had, because they're figuring out some new normals for them. And I love that phrase, Laura Harden, about forced joy. Yeah, I don't like the reality of it, but that's such a great phrase. It says a lot when we do that. And we do that. We say Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays and Happy Hanukkah, and all those are happiness things. And but they don't always fit very much. Yeah. And the absence of somebody is can feel much more noted than it does because sometimes we're not used to seeing people. People have moved out of the house, people we don't see them all the time anyway, and so we're not as aware of their absence on our day to day. But when we gather together at a time that we would typically see them and interact with them, then their absence, comes to the top. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I really appreciate this comment about some family members like to reminisce and share stories and others don't. That can really make it challenging and complicated too. Yeah. Yeah. And then families move away and change. And so we may have already lost some things, and this may magnify that loss. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for all the different comments. We're going to come back to later with some other comments, and if you have any more, feel free to throw in. But I'm going to ask you some questions toward the end, hopefully when we have time, that about what stood out to you about what we're talking about today or what might be helpful. So know that we're going to come back to that if we have time. So you all have touched on so many of these things that make grief and the holiday season a challenge. And one is that there's this a side of the conflicting agendas. So our grief agenda that we could think of as the loss orientation and that dual process model, maybe taking us in one place where we're focusing on or making space for and wrestling with the painful parts, um, the sadness or the yearning or the anger of the unfairness of it all. And of course could be many other things, the confusion about why it all happened at all. And then so that's the grief part. But then the holiday agenda part typically is not that. It's remembering positive things and celebrating positive things, and there's so many things to do. And but there are some opportunities for change that we're going to come up with later because I think that there's a different frame that it doesn't have to be all loss because what we learn in after we've gone through great loss or sometimes great trauma is there are times that we can learn some things and have a different perspective that we can be grateful for, even though we're not grateful for how we were able to learn it. And then the question for us really is how are those grief needs connected to their holiday needs? Because we may feel both. We may feel pulled in a couple different directions, or we maybe feel pulled in one direction and other people's expectations are pulling us in a different direction. So when we think about the holiday seasons, for many of us, they really are a celebration of connection. And they remind us of the people that we love and who have been very important to us. And so it's both our friends and our family. I love the thing that many people experienced just in the last few weeks when they call it a Friendsgiving, where they perhaps didn't have family around to get together with, but they did get together with friends, or perhaps friends were the more welcoming and supportive place to be. Holidays also connect us to who we are, who we came from, and they're really a time where we reflect on our whole life about, so what was Christmas like when I was a kid, and how did it change? And in the early years of our family, or as our kids got older, or where we are now, and it connects us to culture about how we did things. So how do we do things here in Arkansas, or what are some typical ways that it's celebrated, in other countries or in other religious traditions or in other ethnic communities? There's different things, but it connects us to those places. And many of us have a mixed relationship with our history and our culture. We are grateful for many parts of it, and sometimes we are frustrated with other parts of it, and sometimes we have a lot of ambivalence where we like it, but we also um, have some misgivings. So when we've had a big loss and we're grieving, those connections can be damaged, and we may not feel it the same as we used to. So we may not be able to have um, the holidays as we did before, or there may be those connections with other people have changed, or perhaps our own who we are has changed because we can't see ourselves the same. So they can be changed, but not totally absent. It may just be that they're different, but their difference is a big deal. And I appreciate those the comments earlier about expectations because my goodness, there are so many expectations. So here in the United States, we say Merry Christmas. I think, Laura, what I hear in people we were talking with, Laura and I were talking before we got started about some of her family comes from England, and I hear people in the UK, at least in movies and TV shows, they say Happy Christmas as opposed to Merry Christmas. But it's all happy, right? Nobody says have a crappy Christmas or it's all happy. And there's so many social things that are out there. We get invited to dinners and parties um and then there's stuff. There are so many things to do. So I don't know about you, but when I was growing up as a kid, it felt like that was a whole nother season of the year, not just a month, but like several months that happened in between Thanksgiving and Christmas. There was so much anticipation about Christmas that it just seemed like it took forever. But now it does not. Now it feels like it goes so fast, and there's a pressure of so many things to do. And there's this, again, this expectation. Even on my street, so many of the people on my street, they have lights and decorations up, and we haven't gotten around to it yet. And so there's that feeling of, oh, we should have our stuff up, or we should have our house looks kind of depressing. There's nothing special about it. And so there's these shoulds that we put on ourselves that that are not always very helpful. And there are traditions that because we've done something for a long time, we have this expectation that that's the way we ought to do it. It's not true that we have to be bound to that, but it can feel that way. It can feel true. So as we think about what might be helpful, I'm going to suggest a few concepts that might be helpful. One of the big concepts is an idea of permission. That as we come into a holiday season, which is different because somebody who was a really important to us, an important part of our lives, perhaps an important part of our holiday time in the past is gone. And so one permission we can feel like is to do some things differently. We don't have to do it the same. Now, there could be part of us that expects that, but we don't have to do it the same. We could do some things differently. But we could also feel the permission, even though life is different, we could do some of the same. And we could hopefully find a way to give ourselves permission, no matter what the felt expectations are, what the culture we want us to do, to say we can do what works for us. You know, this happens in a very practical ways for families. So in my family, what has been the most typical thing to do for most of my life, it was to gather at my parents' house for the holidays, for both Thanksgiving and for Christmas. And there were particular food dishes that we would have. My mother made most of them. As we got older, we also made some of them. But there were some things that you could count on at the table and that we had. Some of them we liked, some of them because my father liked them. For instance, we always had Thanksgiving, we'd have a turkey, but we also had chicken and dumplings because chicken and dumplings was my dad's favorite. And we also had Christmas. And when my mother died, and especially after my father died, we had to decide, so what kind of food do we want to have? She used to make this. Do we want to have the same stuff? Or do we want to do different things? And we did some things because it was what my dad liked, but he's not here. So what do we want? And it was freeing, but it was also felt kind of anxiety producing because we were kind of unmoored because we used to know what it was supposed to look like, but now we didn't. And we used to know where we gathered, but now we don't. We don't gather in the same place. And so what kind of things do we want to do the same? And what kind of things do we want to do different? You could imagine in a family that who celebrates Christmas, for instance, that one person in the family could say, I have no interest in putting up a Christmas tree. And another person who says, I have to have the Christmas tree. It's not Christmas without the Christmas tree. And so the question then becomes, what do we do different? And what do we do the same? The other concept would be intention, that oftentimes, because of tradition, because of what our culture has expected and what our families have expected, or religious communities have expected, we know what this is supposed to look like. And then we can go on autopilot. These are the things we do, these are the foods we have, this is how we gather. But because a big thing has happened, the suggestion would be that we could see that we actually have choices. We don't have to do it the same, or we could. We could do some things the same, we could do some things differently, or we might find some ways to do things with a blend. So a list we might want to make a list of all the things that we used to do, all the things we feel like we were expected to do, or that we expect ourselves to do. And then let's break that list up. Which are the ones that inside of ourselves that we just have to do? We just feel like we need it. It would be better for us, less stressful to do it than to not do it. So those may be some must-dos. And then maybe there's some that are in the middle that we're not so sure about. And maybe if I'm up to it, I would like to do it, but I don't know if I'm going to be up to it or not. And so I may want to put that on a might do list and then keep my options open, not make a commitment to where I'm going to have to make a meal or have to attend that party, but I can decide at the last minute if I want to do it or not. It might be a not do. Or maybe I know for sure, not this time. I don't got it in me that if there's no attraction to it, it's going to be more stressful than not, and I'm going to do something else. Um, Many families will do that. This a family I know, my best friend in college, who was the best man at my wedding, he died unexpectedly last December. So his brother and um, children who are here, they will get together. That will be something that they feel like they want to do the same, is that they want to be together, but they're not going to be together in the house and have the same kind of meal they used to have. They're going to go somewhere else. They're going to take a trip and have their time together in another place. And so they're doing this blend thing where they're being together is what they want to do. That feels like the must do, but not the way they used to do it. Now, does that mean they're going to do that every year? They're going to be together and take a trip? I don't think so. They're just thinking this year, what's going to work for us this year? And then we're not saying we're making a new tradition, although sometimes people do make a new tradition. But that's not what they're doing, I don't think, so far. They're just saying, what's going to help us this year? And then maybe there'll be some new traditions that will come. One other concept to think about, and that's the concept of compromise. And the reason the compromise can be important is a couple. One is like in the example I gave before, you could have the one family member who says, I have no interest in having a Christmas tree. It is just a source of pain for me to think of that, and I have no energy to do it at all. And the other person says, I gotta have it. It gives me more comfort than stress, and I need to have the Christmas tree. And so then those family members may have to find a way to compromise to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to have a tree or not? Are we going to put it the same place? Maybe we don't put it in the same place because of one person it's hard to see it and the other person not. Maybe we, the person who just can't do it, maybe they used to be a part of the decorating and they're just not going to decorate this year. And they're going to leave it to somebody else to do it. Maybe they're going to decorate, but not as much as they did. Or maybe they're going to go ahead and go through it and do it. Or maybe then the person is going to say, okay, this year I can live without it. Because we do this for the people we love. We compromise. It's not what we would choose if it was just our own selves, but we're trying to figure out what's good for the family. And that can be that true too when we're telling stories around the table. Some families go as far as setting a place for someone who's missing and purposely bringing up the stories. For other people, that doesn't work. So how do we find the ground that works the most for the best? That's part of where sometimes the intentionality part comes in, that where we're not doing it just seeing what happens, but we are purposely figuring out. Maybe we're having a conversation ahead of time about what is going to be the best way so we don't catch somebody off guard by how we thought would be the best, but we didn't give them an opportunity to think about it. And so there may need to be some greater intentionality in that part too. And then we're going to be looking at this compromise between what does my grief self need and what does my holiday self need? And are there ways that we can put those together? And maybe the grief stuff is going to trump all the rest. Maybe the holiday stuff for this year is going to trump the rest, or maybe we're putting it together. And so that's really, I think, where that dual process lands can be helpful because how am I doing on taking care of both of these? How am I doing on respecting the loss and all that it needs from me and all that I need from it and thinking and doing and feeling? And how am I doing with the living? And what could that look like? And what's going to be helpful for me with that? So there's some opportunities in the midst of this where we could do some things differently or the same or that hybrid. One is we could take a step back and say, I could have a different kind of holiday. I've done this for a long time. I've done a holiday this way, but now I don't have to do it the same. I can rethink it and think about what makes sense for me now, what is meaningful for me now. It reminds me when I did work with Laura's mom in the oncology world at Children's Hospital. Sometimes families would say that the cancer took away everything. And when that happened, it always felt like that's too much. We shouldn't let it take away everything because it's not true. Some things change, but some things don't. And sometimes when we would talk to families, we'd encourage them to not let this situation take anything away from you that it doesn't have to unless you want it to. Unless you really realize that what I used to think was important is really not so important. But if it's something you want to hold on to and you can, then hold on to it. If it's something that you could hold on to, but you really realize that it's more trouble than it's worth, it's more effort and investment than it's worth, then this is an opportunity to let it go or let it be different. Some suggestions from what other grieving people have done. So I know a mom and her son died by suicide, and she said that in their family they always put up stockings for Christmas. And she felt like she had to put up his stocking, but obviously there was not a gift for him to receive in that stocking. So she changed it. And she invited the family to put notes about things that they remembered about him or loved about him or even missed about him and put those in his stocking. So they kept some things the same and did some things differently. Some families will give gifts to each other in memory or in honor of the person who died. This is a gift from your dad. I think your dad would have given you something like this. Or we're giving the gifts to other people. We're serving the world, other families, other people, and we're doing it in honor or in inspiration by someone else. So whether sometimes we feed somebody um, dinner at the shelter, and we're doing it in honor of somebody else. We bring toys to the hospital or to give toys or gifts to a needy family, and we're doing it in memory or honor of someone. In our family, uh, my wife and I, between our two children, we lost a baby in mid-pregnancy. And so in the slide, there's a picture of a little snow baby's ornament or figurine. And for a number of years, every year we would buy a new snow baby's ornament to put on the tree. And that was our tree to help us remember. Because decorating the tree was important to us. We still wanted to do it. We still do it. And but those ornaments are memories for us and that were important. Another story that came that we just heard from a family um, this last Survivors of Suicide Loss Day a few weeks ago was from a survivor of suicide loss who asked their friend circle to give them new ornaments for their tree, new ornaments that would be symbolic of support and love for them. And so while their other ornaments of their tree brought up memories and of the past, these were new ornaments that were still important, but they had a different message and a different meaning. I love that. I already talked about how we do food differently. Sometimes we do food the same. Sometimes we do food differently. Sometimes we can blend that. Who's going to make things? Um, I had a mom in a support group whose father died, and she said the question was going to be, so every time when they had at the Thanksgiving table, their father would look out and say, well, who the hell is going to eat all this food? And that was what he said every time. So the question was, who's going to say it? Because somebody needs to say it. They wanted to keep that as part of their tradition, as part of remembering, but somebody needed to say it. I learned from talking with a Jewish community group that one tradition in their faith community was that of the yahrzeit candle. That is a candle that's intended to burn for 24 hours. And it was such a beautiful tradition that my wife and I have bought yahrzeit candles. You can order them or you can get them sometimes at grocery stores. And they're small, but they're intended to burn for a day. And on special days like a holiday or birthdays, then sometimes we will light a candle for somebody that we're missing. And we'll just look up and we'll see it there. And it's a comfort. And one other idea is that for families where one parent has died and you have young children, I thought this was a wonderful idea that so what happens is that if you have two parents in a home, one parent often will scheme and plan with the kids about what we're going to get for the other parent. What are we going to get for mom or dad, for Christmas? And they kind of work with them because the young kids need some help figuring it out and planning ahead and sometimes having the resources to do it. But if you're the widowed parent, then who's going to help your kids do that gift giving? And so if you're a friend or a relative of a family where you have a widowed parent, one way to help them might be to collude with those kids and say, what are we going to give mom or dad for Christmas? If Christmas is what you celebrate. And I thought that was a wonderful and thoughtful idea. So as things start and we go through the holidays, for many people, it can just feel like a gauntlet. I just want to survive it and get to the other side. And maybe that's the best we can do. And if that is, and that's then giving ourselves permission and support to say, that's the best I can do. I'm not going to be merry. I'm not going to enjoy it. I'm just going to try to get to the other side. But I think there is potential as time goes on for different. We talk about the concept of post-traumatic growth. And sometimes I think we can have some post-loss growth or post-traumatic growth in this way, where we can find that there are some things that are actually better fitting for us now, have ways to remember and things to do. Or maybe the meaning changes and we can see what's most important to us in ways that we didn't before because we got caught up in things which didn't have as much meaning and purpose for us. One other thing, if we're going to open it up to your comments and questions, is that, for families who follow the Christian tradition and celebrate Christmas, there can be a feeling like that there's no space in the Christmas stories for grief because it's joy to the world and it's silent night and it's all these stories about comfort and joy and celebration. But the reality in the Christian tradition is right in the middle of that story are grieving people. And in Matthew's gospel, what we see is that there's in the story that King Herod, who is so threatened by the idea that there is a special baby born, the story says that many babies were killed in order to protect his um, political position. And when they were, these are the words in that story, that a voice was heard in Ramah, wailing in loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. So there is a place, even in the Christmas story, for those in the Christian tradition, for grieving people, people who refuse to be consoled, who cannot find consolation, but there is a place for them in that story. If you're looking for some practical ideas, the National Alliance for Children's Grief has a toolkit that has suggestions about many of the ones we've talked about, about how to help kids and families during the holiday time. But I think that the information there is not just for kids, it's also for adults. So I'd encourage you to check that out. So I think we've got enough time for you to do two things. One is in the chat, you may want to share some ideas that you've seen in your family or people you've worked with or in your friend or family circle that you have done that have been meaningful to support grieving during the holidays or support celebrating the holidays while you're grieving. You may have some ideas that we could learn from. So please put those in the chat or perhaps you could do this. What strikes you about what we've talked about today? Or what stands out to you? So if you don't have a suggestion, or if you have one and something else, then please put that in. So I'm going to go back to that chat and we're going to see what you all have to say because you are thoughtful people. And so I don't know what it was, Wendy, that you love, but I'm glad that you love something about that we said. And yeah, ornaments to me are really special. In my family, they're very special. And but they can mean so many different things, which really open things up if we let them mean different things. Yeah, I appreciate that comment about the nativity, Advent and nativity season is a time of waiting, and it's a waiting of a time of darkness, and where we are waiting for light. And some people can really connect to that. For those people for whom Advent and Christmas season is important. Yeah. Well, I love that idea that we kept sending Christmas flowers. Yes. Uh, yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a nice thing about how we can continue doing something, but the meaning even changes, or maybe gets deeper or broader than that. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that idea for the Etsy. There are custom gifts. There's a lot more space than there used to be. about this, and which is I think a really positive thing. And I love the idea of the pictures that we do that. And thank you for the idea of the stockings and the ornaments. Yeah. Wait, I think I missed one. You guys are having so many great ideas. Yeah, thank you, Dawn. That idea of how to compromise really, I think, is part of it is thinking about it ahead of time and to figure out what it is you want and do you don't want to do. Yeah. And then it's okay to do both. It's okay to have both the happy and the sad together. Whoever said that you can only have one, whoever said that was wrong. Because actually, holiday times, even when it's not a big deal, are often bittersweet times, right? Um, because we're thinking about how things used to be, and we're also seeing how things are now. Yeah. 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 Thank you for the comment about the dual process model and the stages of grief and the post-traumatic growth. I think those are really helpful ideas. Yeah. Doing something for other people. Thank you, Janet. Is a huge thing. And because sometimes we're caught up in our own stuff, and so many great things are done for other people during this time of year, and that is really meaningful. Yeah. Seeing the permission part, putting Christmas tree places, the yard side candle. Yeah. That's been a great thing it's been so meaningful to our family. Um, Double dipped feelings, definitely. Love that book. Well, I'm going to check that book out. Okay, double dip feelings. That children's book. Thank you for that. And yeah, yeah, the permission piece. That fits of even when we don't have a loss, right? We should be able to look back and say, does this really make sense to us? And I don't know if this is one of those things that has really happened or not. I've heard this story from several different people, so you don't know if this is one of those stories that just got passed around to try to teach us something. So it's true, but it's not didn't actually happen. But the story is of the family where uh, they were making the pot roast and cutting the corners off of it, and somebody said, "Well, why do you do that?" I said, "I don't know. We just always did it in our family. That's what we do." And they finally got to the matriarch of the family, and they said, "Why do we cut the corners off the pot roast?" And the matriarch of the family said, "Well, that's because the pan was too small." And so it wasn't that it was had a deep meaning to it. It was just practical, but it became something that people got stuck with. And so you can imagine a family saying, "Well, we're going to quit doing that." Or they might say, "You know what? I love that. We're going to keep doing that because we've been doing it." And so, but you have some choice about the matter. Yeah. All right. I think we have about come to our end of our time. Thank you all for all your comments and the messages and your suggestions and sharing those. I will share these slides with Laura so she can share those out with you all. If we can be of any use to you in our program, please let us know. We do a grief and loss email newsletter that comes out quarterly. And if you're the kind of people who come to this, you might be the kind of people interested in that. And those will check out our website, and it's called the Mourning News. So, Laura, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Greg. That was an amazing conversation, and I love seeing everybody's stories and ideas in the chat. That was really cool. So just a couple of things about the CEUs if you're interested in receiving one. Our code for today is 5021, and I will email everyone who came to this webinar a link to a survey. That survey will prompt you to put in that code again, 5021. And once you have submitted that survey, it will automatically send you a CEU. So I would like to thank everyone for coming today. We really appreciate your attendance. This is our last webinar of 2024. So catch us in January, and we'll be doing an introduction into child advocacy centers. So I hope to see you there. Have a happy holidays, and Thank you, everybody.